She was fired for bringing her son to work. No warning, no second chances, just a hallway, a paper termination slip, and a little boy clutching a tiger drawing, too young to understand, but old enough to blame himself. What happened next? It didn't make the news, but it changed everything. This is the story of how one mother, cast aside for choosing her child, built a new world from the ashes of rejection, a world where no one would ever have to hide their humanity just to survive. And it all started with the word, "You're fired." The morning Elena Alvarez was fired, the sky outside was the same gray as the break room counters, flat, washed out, indifferent. The kind of sky that neither promised rain nor sun, just more of the same. She had shown up early, as she always did, carrying a thermos of instant coffee in one hand and her 7-year-old son Mateo's backpack slung over her shoulder. Her boy was tucked in beside her, groggy-eyed, but quiet, gripping a crumpled drawing he'd made for her birthday and a lunch bag with 2 slices of bread and a peeled banana. Elena worked the early shift at Briar Hill Corporate Cleaners, a contract janitorial company that handled maintenance for half the office parks in the city. Her job was to scrub restrooms, take out trash, mop tile that always seemed to carry the faint footprints of strangers. She wore navy blue scrubs, rubber gloves that pinched her wrists, and kept her hair in a bun with a pencil because the elastic she'd been using had snapped last week and she hadn't yet replaced it. She didn't complain. It was honest work. Quiet work. And most days it was her only safe place. Her supervisor, Joyce, hadn't liked Mateo being there, not from the beginning. "This isn't a daycare," she had said on the second day Elena brought him. "I'm letting you off easy this week, but HR won't be so understanding." Elena nodded, apologetic, humble. But what could she do? Mateo's school had shifted to half days due to budget cuts, and aftercare programs were full for months. She couldn't afford a babysitter, not on the $13 an hour the cleaning company paid. So she'd told Mateo to stay in the break room, to color quietly, to pretend he was invisible. And he had. He was a good boy, obedient, wide-eyed, always watching. That morning, as Elena refilled soap dispensers in the third-floor women's bathroom, she heard her name crackle over the building's PA system. "Elena Alvarez, to the main office, please, immediately." Her heart dropped into her shoes. She found Mateo sitting in the hallway outside the office door, legs crossed, coloring. His drawing this time was of a tiger, fierce, orange and black, with green eyes. "Did something happen?" she asked, crouching beside him. He shrugged. "The lady with the short hair asked if I was yours. I said yes." She kissed his forehead, smoothed his hair, and stood. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and printer ink. Joyce sat behind her desk, arms folded. Next to her was a man in a white shirt and an ill-fitting tie. HR, probably. Elena had never seen him before. "Miss Alvarez?" Joyce said, her tone clipped. "We've discussed this already." Elena nodded. "Yes, ma'am, I remember, but I didn't have a choice. Your choices are not the company's concern. This is a professional environment. We've received complaints." "What kind of complaints?" "Tenants don't like seeing a child unattended in their office buildings. Liability issues. It's non-compliance with our contract." The HR rep slid a piece of paper across the desk. "We have to let you go, effective immediately." Just like that. No warnings, no severance, no final paycheck, just the cold finality of an unsigned form and eyes that wouldn't meet hers. She didn't argue. She just nodded once, turned, and took Mateo's hand. They walked out together, his backpack swaying beside her hip, the drawing of the tiger fluttering behind them in the breeze of the automatic doors. She didn't cry until they got home, not because of the job, though the money would be missed, but because of the look Mateo gave her, like he blamed himself, like he knew too much. "Mijo," she whispered, kneeling in their small one-bedroom apartment, the lights flickering overhead because the landlord still hadn't fixed the wiring. "It's not your fault." He looked away, ashamed. She gathered him in her arms, held him until her knees ached and her breath calmed. That night, while he slept curled in a tangle of two small blankets, she sat at the chipped kitchen table filling out job applications. Retail, fast food, night shifts, anything. But every form asked the same thing: available hours, reliable transportation, and none of them had a box for single mother, son too young to be alone, will do anything to work. Days passed, then weeks. She got an interview at a hotel downtown. It went well until they asked about weekends and she mentioned childcare. The manager's eyes glazed. She didn't get a call back. Her savings ran out in week 3. By week 4, she was selling household items online: a coffee maker, her old laptop, a gold chain her mother had left her. Mateo tried to help, cleaned without being asked, ate less. Once, he offered her a $5 bill he found in the street. "Use it for rent," he whispered. She kissed his cheek, handed it back, and told him to buy crayons instead. It was in week 5 that the call came. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered anyway. "Hi, is this Elena Alvarez?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes." "I'm calling from Lakeshore Commercial. We got your resume through the employment agency downtown. Would you be available to come in for an interview tomorrow?" Elena blinked. Yes, absolutely. She borrowed a blouse from her neighbor, ironed it twice, woke Mateo early, and promised him a treat if he sat quietly in the lobby while she interviewed. The building was tall, clean, the kind of place she used to polish until her knees hurt. The woman who greeted her at the front desk had warm eyes. She offered Mateo a juice box without being asked, told him there were coloring books in the waiting room. Elena sat across from her interviewer 5 minutes later, but he didn't speak right away. He stared at her file, then at her, then back at the file. "Elena Alvarez," he said finally, "you worked at Briar Hill Cleaners, terminated for bringing your son to work?" She nodded, shame burning across her skin. He looked at her, really looked, and then he smiled. "I was that kid," he said. She blinked. Excuse me?" "My mother used to clean offices, too. I sat in break rooms with peanut butter sandwiches and a library book every afternoon after school. I know what it's like to grow up in a janitor's world." She didn't speak. Couldn't. "My name's Daniel Ruiz," he continued, "Vice President of Operations here, and I'm not just offering you a job. I'm offering you a place where your son is never something to hide." Her breath caught. "You mean he can—" "We have an employee support room, kids' corner, flexible schedules. You do good work, Elena, and I'd rather have someone dependable with a kid than a dozen unreliable employees without one." She started to cry, couldn't stop. He handed her a tissue, said, "You start Monday." And that was the beginning of everything, of healing, of hope, of Mateo finding his place in a world that hadn't been built with boys like him in mind, but now had cracks wide enough for sunlight to slip through. She had been fired for being a mother, but hired for having survived it. On Monday morning, Elena woke up before the alarm, heart already racing in her chest, as if it knew this day held something different. She moved quietly around the small apartment, careful not to wake Mateo just yet. The apartment was still dim, the soft blue light of early dawn seeping through thin curtains. In the kitchen, she poured hot water over instant coffee, hands steady, but eyes still full of questions. Was this real? Would they change their minds? Had she dreamed it? But when she opened her inbox and saw the official welcome email from Lakeshore Commercial, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for 5 weeks straight. She took extra time getting Mateo ready, combed his hair, made sure he had a warm hoodie, even tucked one of his favorite action figures into his backpack in case he got nervous or bored. He was quiet, as he usually was when something new loomed on the horizon, but when she buttoned the last button of his jacket and knelt to his level, he whispered, "You look happy today." "I am," she replied, "because you get to come with me. No more hiding, okay?" He nodded solemnly, then wrapped his arms around her neck. That hug meant more than anything an employer had ever offered her. It was the permission she needed to hope again. They took the bus together, Mateo pressed against her side, both of them watching the city roll past through fogged-up windows. The building was even more polished in daylight, the glass gleaming, the landscaping so pristine it looked like someone brushed every leaf into place. Elena hesitated for half a second outside the front doors. Then Mateo reached up and took her hand. "Let's go," he said. Inside, everything moved with purpose. People in blazers and heels passed them with coffees and folders, their voices a quiet hum of productivity. But no one stared. No one questioned her presence. When they reached the front desk, the same receptionist from before waved them over with a smile. "Elena, Mateo, good morning." Mateo grinned shyly. Elena tried to keep the emotion off her face. "You can head up to the third floor. Daniel's expecting you. And Mateo, the kids' corner is already open. Would you like to check it out first?" He nodded eagerly. The kids' corner turned out to be more than Elena imagined. It wasn't just a small room with toys thrown into bins. It had beanbags, bookshelves, a tiny desk with coloring supplies, even a tablet for educational games. A kind-faced woman named Ms. Reyna ran the space and welcomed Mateo like he'd been there all along. "You just let me know if he needs anything," she said. "And don't worry, we've got him." Elena stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her son settle in, the weight on her shoulders beginning to lift for the first time in years. Daniel met her in the hallway. Not in a rush, not checking his watch, just walking with her like an equal. "We'll get you set up," he said. "Your first week, you'll shadow the facilities coordinator, mostly inventory, inspections, support calls. After that, we'll talk about what kind of schedule you want. We work with people, not against them." "I still can't believe this," she murmured. He smiled. "Believe it, because I remember. I remember watching my mom scrub bathroom tiles while I sat in a chair with one broken wheel and a PB&J sandwich. I remember thinking she must be the strongest person in the world." "She probably was," Elena said. "I think you are too," he replied. By the end of her first day, Elena had learned the layout of the building, met 3 different team leads, and completed her onboarding packet. She was given a locker, a headset, a company badge with her name printed clearly beside her picture. She stared at that badge longer than she expected to. It wasn't just a laminated piece of plastic. It was proof that she was no longer just surviving. She was seen, valued. Mateo came running up to her at 5:02 p.m. with a drawing of a rocket ship. "I made this for your locker," he said. That night, as they rode the bus home and watched the orange sun sink behind the buildings, Elena leaned her head against the window and felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. She knew there would still be bills, still be stress, still be moments of panic when ends didn't meet. But this was a start. Weeks passed, and Elena settled into a rhythm she hadn't had since before Mateo was born. She arrived early, stayed focused, always asked what else she could do. By her 3rd week, she was training new hires and helping with scheduling. By her 2nd month, she was offered a raise and a formal title, Facilities Operations Associate. But something deeper was changing too. Her confidence, her voice. She began making suggestions during staff meetings, found herself researching workplace efficiency articles on the weekends. She started dreaming again, not wild dreams, but simple, beautiful ones, of getting her GED, of maybe taking an evening course, of someday managing a team herself. Daniel noticed. One day he asked her to stay after the team check-in. "You're going to think I'm pushing you," he said, "but have you ever thought about going further here, learning the systems, maybe working toward coordination Or even building management? Elena shook her head slowly. I never finished school. I don't know how far I could go. You're already doing the hard part, he said. Showing up, solving problems. The rest can be taught. She looked at him, unsure. I was serious that day, Elena. I was that kid. And if someone hadn't offered my mom a second chance, I wouldn't be standing here now. She looked down at her hands, calloused, capable. What would I even need to do? She asked. I'll walk you through it, he said, step by step. By her 6th month, she was attending training sessions on inventory systems and digital facility dashboards. She was learning terminology she'd only heard in passing before: preventive maintenance, asset life cycle, real estate compliance. And she was good at it. Meanwhile, Mateo had become a fixture at the kids' corner. He helped younger children build Lego cities and told new arrivals that his mom worked upstairs. He wasn't embarrassed. He was proud. One day, Daniel walked into the kids' room to find Mateo explaining how janitorial routes worked in buildings like theirs. He draws out the floor plan, Ms. Reyna whispered, laughing. Says he's going to manage the building one day, like his mom. That night, Daniel called his own mother. She was in her 70s now. Still sharp, still stubborn. I met someone, he told her, a woman who reminded me of you, only she's doing it in a time that's even harder. His mother didn't speak for a moment. Then, good. Maybe now someone else's kid will get to sit in a corner and feel safe. The cycle had started again, but this time not in silence. This time in strength. Spring brought with it the soft scent of new beginnings. The trees lining the sidewalks outside the Lakeshore Commercial Building bloomed into bursts of pink and white, their petals tumbling gently over the polished walkway where Elena now walked every weekday morning. Her strides had changed, no longer small or cautious. They were steady now, shoulders back, eyes ahead. 6 months ago, she had stepped into this building with a knot in her chest and her son's small hand in hers. Now she stepped in with purpose, her work badge clipped proudly to her shirt, her son waving from the children's room without hesitation. On a Friday morning, she was called into Daniel's office again. Not unusual, but this time something in his voice had been different, calmer, like he was holding something back. She knocked softly on the glass door and stepped inside. Daniel looked up from his desk with a smile. Close the door, Elena. Have a seat. She obeyed, the butterflies returning just slightly. Not fear, just the familiar unease of not knowing what was coming next. It had taken time to trust that surprises didn't always bring pain. He slid a folder across the desk. This is for you, he said. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the top page. It took her a moment to register the bold heading, Promotion Recommendation, Facilities Operations Supervisor. She looked up, stunned. You've already been acting like a supervisor for 3 months, Daniel said, coordinating schedules, resolving tenant issues, training new hires, all while keeping the highest performance record on the team. But I don't have a degree, she said, her voice small. You have something better, he said. Experience, grit, leadership, and a team who trusts you. Her hands trembled as she closed the folder. There's more, he said. It's a salaried position, full benefits, tuition reimbursement if you want to finish school, and Mateo's care continues, of course. She tried to speak, but no words came. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the desk. Elena, you were fired for being a mother, but you've risen because of it, not in spite of it. What you've built here isn't just a job, it's a foundation, and I want to help you keep building. Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't look away. She met his gaze and nodded. Yes, she whispered. I want it. I want all of it. The news traveled quickly through the team. Hugs, congratulations, claps on the back, a bouquet of flowers from Miss Reyna in the children's room. But what meant the most was Mateo's reaction when she told him that evening on the bus ride home. You're the boss now? He asked, eyes wide. She laughed. One of them, yes. He grinned, then leaned his head on her arm. I knew you could be. Her promotion changed more than just her paycheck. It changed her rhythm, her confidence, the way people looked at her in meetings. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't someone they passed by in the halls with a polite nod. She had a voice, and slowly she started using it for more than just work. She began asking about the company's outreach, their hiring practices. She started suggesting partnerships with local women's shelters, places she knew intimately from her years of barely scraping by. One afternoon, she and Daniel sat in the conference room going over the quarterly vendor report. She hesitated, then said, "What if we created a work program for single parents, not just flexible hours, but intentional onboarding? Transportation vouchers, food stipends, a way to start over." Daniel didn't even blink. "Draft the proposal," he said. "Let's build it." They called it Second Shift, a mentorship and employment initiative for parents in transition. The pilot launched within 2 months. 5 participants were placed at Lakeshore Commercial. Within another 2 months, 3 had full-time positions. One of them cried on her first day, telling Elena, "This is the first time in years I've had keys to something that wasn't falling apart." That night, Elena pulled an old shoebox from the top shelf of her closet. Inside were her eviction notices, her rejection letters, the scribbled notes she'd once made about bus schedules, childcare hours, grocery budgets. She added something new to the box, her supervisor badge, the one she'd worn just one day before receiving the promotion, the one that still smelled faintly of bleach and old copier toner. It didn't mean she was leaving the past behind. It meant she was carrying it differently now. The following year, Mateo's school hosted a family career night. Parents were invited to speak about their jobs. He signed Elena up without telling her. "You sure?" she asked when he showed her the flyer. "You always tell me I should be proud," he said. "Now it's your turn." So she went, dressed in her company polo, holding photos of her team. She stood in front of a room full of children and parents and told her story. Not all the hard parts, but enough to see heads tilt, eyes widen. A mother in the back blinked quickly and gave a small nod. A teacher placed a hand over her heart, and when it was over, one little girl raised her hand. "Are you the boss?" Elena smiled. "One of them." The girl's eyes lit up. That night, on the walk home, Mateo said, "I think you're helping people who don't even know it yet." Elena looked down at him and whispered, "That's the plan." Years passed. Second Shift became a nationally recognized program. Elena was invited to speak at conferences, panels, podcasts. She didn't always say yes. She liked the work itself, the real work. But once in a while, she stood on a stage and told the truth about what it means to be discarded for your humanity and then hired for it. She kept Mateo's tiger drawing in her office, framed in wood, right beside a quote she'd found one night while researching leadership models. The ones who are seen as burdens today often grow into the ones who carry us all. When she saw someone struggling, a new mother panicked about coverage, a father asking quietly if he could bring his daughter to a shift, she didn't just say yes. She said, "I was you. I am you. Let's make it work." And that legacy, passed from Daniel to Elena, from Elena to her team, kept growing. Because somewhere a little boy had once sat in a break room listening quietly, watching his mother be pushed out of a place that didn't understand the cost of her love. And years later, he watched her walk back into a building that did. And she never walked out alone again. There came a moment nearly 3 years after Elena Alvarez had first walked into Lakeshore Commercial with her son's hand tucked in hers, when she found herself on the other side of a desk, interviewing someone else. The woman sitting before her wore a too-thin coat for winter, her fingers tapping nervously against a worn resume. Her hair was pulled back in a familiar practical bun, and there was a quiet urgency in her eyes, not panic, not desperation, but something close, a silent plea. "My name is Carla," the woman said softly. "I used to work overnights at a packaging plant, but my mother got sick and I had to leave. My daughter's in kindergarten now. I can't leave her alone in the mornings, and I can't find care that fits those hours. She paused, swallowing hard. "I know that's not ideal for a company." Elena folded her hands, nodding slowly. She didn't speak right away. "Do you mind if I ask where your daughter would be during the day?" she said gently. Carla hesitated. "With me, at least for now. I can keep her quiet. She colors. She's good. You won't even know she's there." Elena smiled, warmth rising in her chest like a tide. She reached into the drawer of her desk, pulled out a small laminated flyer, and slid it across the table. Carla glanced down. Second shift. The words child-friendly support programs, training, mentorship, and wraparound employment services were written beneath it. "We have a room," Elena said. "Not a daycare. A place designed for kids like your daughter. Supervised, safe, welcoming. We also have a shuttle partnership if you need help with transportation. All part of the program." Carla blinked quickly, her lips parting in disbelief. You'd let me bring her?" "Not let," Elena said. "We encourage it. This job works with your life, not around it." Tears welled in Carla's eyes. She looked down at her resume, then back up. "I didn't think anyone would say that. Every place I've applied, the second I mention her, I'm done." "I know," Elena said. "That used to be me." Carla didn't know what that meant. Not fully, not yet. But she would. By the following month, she'd be part of Elena's growing team, confident, present, no longer afraid. And Elena would walk home that night, her own child no longer a boy with coloring books, but a tall 13-year-old who now stayed late at school to help run the AV club and practiced his speeches for the debate team in their living room. "You should run for office someday," she'd joke. "Nah," he'd reply, grinning. "I want to do something that actually changes things." And she'd pause, hearing her own words echoing back to her through him. The impact of what she'd built reached farther than she realized. One morning, Elena received a letter in her office mailbox, handwritten, in looping cursive. "Dear Ms. Alvarez, my daughter works for you now. Her name is Shanna. She has 2 kids, and she used to cry at my kitchen table every night after job interviews, saying no one would ever hire a mother with 2 mouths to feed and no college degree. Then she met you. I don't know how to thank someone for giving my daughter her life back. But I can say this. I'm proud she works for someone who once knew what it felt like to sit across from a desk and be seen as a risk instead of a person. Thank you for helping her, for seeing her, for not forgetting. With deepest respect, Patricia Randall." Elena kept that letter, framed it beside Mateo's tiger drawing and the original second shift flyer from her proposal. One wall in her office was now filled with mementos like that. Drawings, letters, ID badges from mentees who had graduated into full-time careers. A faded copy of her first termination notice, too, still folded the same way it had been when she was handed it 3 years ago. She kept it there not as a scar, but as a mile marker, a point on the map where her life had taken a turn that didn't feel like grace at the time, but had led her to all of this. Sometimes Mateo would come by after school and sit in the chair across from her desk. He was taller now, his voice deeper, but his eyes, the way they watched, the way they noticed, were the same. "You ever wonder," he asked one day, "what would have happened if they hadn't fired you?" She looked out the window for a long moment, then said, "I think I'd still be working, but I wouldn't have become myself." He nodded slowly. "I'm glad they did then," he said. She smiled. "Me too. Eventually." In her rare free time, Elena started writing. Not memoirs, not blogs, just small pieces. Vignettes. She called them quiet shifts, stories of the moments between everything. The coffee she shared with a new employee, afraid to say they were homeless. the smile from a maintenance man when his teenage son landed a college interview, the way one little girl in the kids' room painted a mural of Miss Elena holding a city in her arms. Elena didn't try to become famous, but one of her stories found its way into an editorial column about modern work-life balance. Soon after, requests came in from journalists, organizations, even a publishing house. She turned most of them down. But one request stood out. A high school journalism student named Nia wanted to write a feature piece for her senior project. Her teacher had shown the class the second shift video on LinkedIn. Nia had been raised by her grandmother and always felt out of place when conversations about family assumed a nuclear norm. She wanted to explore the idea of workspaces designed around compassion. Elena invited her in. They sat in her office, surrounded by 3 years of hard-won artifacts. Nia asked, "What would you tell the woman you were the day you were fired?" Elena thought about that for a long time. "I'd tell her to keep Matteo close," she said, "to let the shame fall away like old paint, and to remember that sometimes the doors that slam hardest are the ones that need to break open." Nia blinked, overwhelmed. "You're going to change how people think about work." "I'm not," Elena replied. "We are, all of us, one story at a time." That article ended up winning first place in the state competition. It was titled, "She Brought Her Son to Work and Built a New World Because of It." When it was published, Daniel Ruiz sent Elena a single email. "I told you once that I was that kid. Now, so many of us are. And because of you, none of them have to hide anymore." A decade passed, and in that span of time, what Elena Alvarez had built extended far beyond anything she had once dared to hope. The second shift program had spread to more than 40 cities, adopted by regional governments, integrated into private corporations, and taught in business schools as a case study in human-centered employment design. What began as one opportunity in one building became a network. A safety net spun quietly, tightly, around the lives of people who had long been told they were too complicated to accommodate. But Elena had never sought accolades. Her name was known now, sure, invited to conferences, featured in profiles, praised on leadership panels. But every morning, she still brewed her coffee at home in the same ceramic mug Matteo had painted when he was 10. The letters were chipped now, the red heart misshapen, but she used it anyway. It grounded her, reminded her where it had started, in a break room with flickering lights and a boy too polite to complain about hunger. She kept working, quietly, purposefully, always watching for the next woman who walked through the door with uncertainty in her eyes and brilliance hidden beneath fatigue. Matteo was 20 now, studying urban planning, interning for the city's infrastructure department. He still came home on Sundays to do laundry, eat her cooking, and talk about how he wanted to help design communities where dignity wasn't something you had to earn. One afternoon, she found him on her porch, laptop open, blueprint sketches scrawled across a pad. "You know," he said without looking up, "I'm thinking of proposing a project to convert abandoned municipal buildings into community-led co-working and child-care hubs, sort of like second shift, but city-owned." She looked at him for a long time, her heart swelling in ways words couldn't hold. "Do it," she said. "They need that." He grinned. "I had a good blueprint to follow." He didn't mean the drawing. He meant her. One evening, she was asked to attend a retirement dinner for Daniel Ruiz. It was held in the same lakeshore commercial atrium where she'd once mopped floors on contract, hoping no one noticed her child asleep in the corner. The tables were covered in white linens now. String lights blinked across the ceiling. The company had grown exponentially under Daniel's leadership. But what they spoke about most that night wasn't profit. It was culture, values, the feeling of belonging that had rooted in the company's DNA, because he'd chosen not just to hire for efficiency, but to believe in people. When it was Elena's turn to speak, she didn't bring notes. She stepped up to the podium, looked out over the sea of faces, executives, interns, janitors, HR teams, childcare workers, receptionists, and said, "I'm not going to thank Daniel for giving me a second chance, because what he gave me wasn't charity, it was recognition of effort, of dignity, of motherhood, not as a liability but as a strength." She paused. "I came into this company hoping not to be noticed. He made it impossible not to be. And because of that, I learned how to make room for others the same way." Daniel wiped a tear from the corner of his eye, then stood and embraced her when she stepped down. Later, she found a note at her table. It was in Daniel's handwriting. "You were always the one. I just got to open the door." After his retirement, Elena was offered his position. She declined. Instead, she nominated a woman named Chloe, someone she'd mentored through second shift, who had started as a front desk associate and risen through every department with grace and intelligence. "Chloe is ready," Elena told the board, "and I want to keep building elsewhere. I've got cities calling, women waiting, voices unheard." So she stepped into a new role, founder and national director of the Second Shift Coalition. Her office moved to a modest space downtown. Not glass towers, not corporate lobbies. A former elementary school repurposed into a hub for community-powered employment, with child care on the first floor and job coaching on the second. She met people where they were, and she made sure they never felt like they had to choose between their family and their future again. One morning she arrived early and found a young woman waiting outside the building, baby on her hip, a diaper bag slung over her shoulder, fear etched into her posture. "I'm sorry," the woman said quickly. "I didn't know if I was supposed to come today or wait for a call. Someone said you help people like me." Elena unlocked the front door, smiled. "We do," she said, "and you're right on time." She let the woman in, showed her to the coffee station, introduced her to a mentor, watched her settle in. Then Elena returned to her desk, pulled open her drawer, and looked at the file she kept there. Her own termination letter, still folded, still stained from the day she'd clutched it too hard. She touched it briefly, not in mourning, but in gratitude. Because if she hadn't been fired for bringing her son to work, she never would have become the woman who now created entire systems where that sentence no longer made sense. Now people were hired because they had survived, because they had endured, because they knew how to hold a baby on one hip and carry a department on the other, and because one woman had stood up after being pushed out and refused to sit down again. That summer, Elena was invited to speak at a national policy summit on equitable labor design. She almost didn't go. The invitation came with hotel accommodations, a speaking stipend, and a panel spot between two CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. It sounded important, impressive even, but also far from the spaces where she felt most herself, her office, her program coordinators, the children's art taped to hallway walls. But Matteo urged her to accept. "You belong in the room," he told her. "You've always belonged. They just didn't know it yet." So she went. Not in a designer suit or with a practiced speechwriter's cadence, but in a soft gray blazer, scuffed black flats, and with a folder of photos from second shift programs across the country. Photos of mothers holding keys to their first apartments, of fathers reading books in child care corners, of job boards filled with names once written off by employers. She didn't talk about revenue or workforce models. She talked about recognition, about designing systems with tenderness, about how dignity can't be outsourced. When she finished, the moderator looked stunned. One of the CEOs next to her said quietly into his mic, "That's what leadership sounds like." After the event, a woman in her 50s with a press badge approached her in the lobby. "I used to write about startups," she said, "but I think I've been chasing the wrong stories." Elena nodded. "Chase the ones with roots." Back in her hotel room that night, She sat by the window, looking out at a skyline she didn't know but no longer felt small against. She was no longer the woman who begged silently to be taken seriously. She was the one others looked to now when they asked, "How do we make it better?" And she never answered with theory. She answered with faces, with names, with the sound of Mateo's voice on the other end of the phone saying, "You're changing things." When she returned to her building, the kids in the downstairs program had drawn a welcome banner. It was crooked and colorful and beautiful. One child had drawn her with a cape. Another had added a small speech bubble that said, "Yes, you can." She kept it up for weeks. Soon after, the city announced that one of Mateo's pilot proposals, a neighborhood co-op work hub modeled after Second Shift, had been approved for funding. He brought her the news in person, holding blueprints under one arm and a coffee in his other hand. "They're giving us the old Jefferson Library," he said, barely able to contain his grin. "We're going to turn it into a hub with co-working space, drop-in childcare, a food co-op, and even community-led transportation shuttles." She took the blueprints from him, eyes scanning every inch. "You did this," she said. "I watched you do it first," he replied. On opening day, the mayor called Mateo a visionary and one of the youngest planners in city history. But Mateo stood at the mic and said, "I owe all of this to my mother, who taught me that standing in the margins long enough makes you an expert in building bridges." Elena cried quietly into her sleeve. When the ceremony ended, she walked through the building alone for a while. She paused in a reading nook where a mother was curled up with her toddler, both of them asleep in a sunlit corner. She stopped in the communal kitchen where a man in paint-splattered jeans was writing a note to leave above the counter, "Please label your leftovers." She smiled. Outside, the new sign above the front entrance had been hand-painted by local students. It read, "The Alvarez Ruiz Center for Community and Care." She ran her fingers gently along the edge of the letters. Later that week, she received an email from her former supervisor at Briar Hill Cleaners, Joyce. The subject line simply said, "Congratulations." The message read, "Elena, I saw the article, the ribbon cutting, the name on the building. I don't expect you to remember me, but I remember you. I've thought about that day often over the years, the way you left with your head high, the way your son looked at you. I was wrong. About what mattered. About you. I hope it's not too late to say that." Elena stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't reply, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't need to. Some stories finish themselves. At the next quarterly leadership summit for Second Shift, she opened her talk not with her usual program metrics, but with Mateo's blueprints. "This is the future," she said, "not built from scratch, but built from memory. We are not here to save people. We are here to remember them, to remind them of who they were before they were told they couldn't bring their whole selves to work." She held up a photo of herself and Mateo, taken on her first day at Lakeshore Commercial. "This boy," she said, "was never the problem. He was the seed." Applause rang out, not for show, but because everyone in that room had lived some part of her story, or knew someone who had. And after the summit, someone placed a sticky note on her door. It read, "You stood up when the world sat down. Now we stand with you." She left it there for a long time until the colors faded, until the building was renovated and they repainted the door. But even then, she remembered the words, because by then she didn't need to read them to believe them. She had built a life out of what others called impossible. And in doing so, she made sure no one else had to choose between feeding their child and feeding their purpose. She was fired for bringing her son to work. Now entire cities brought their children to the world she built. Years later, when Elena Alvarez was asked to deliver the keynote address at a national summit titled Workplaces of the Future, she stood before a packed auditorium where some of the most powerful figures in labor, policy, and education sat waiting for insight. What they got instead was memory. She began not with data or projections, but with a story. "I was once told I wasn't professional," she said, voice calm but firm. "Not because I missed work, not because I showed up late, but because I brought my child with me when I had nowhere else for him to go. I was fired before the end of my shift. No conversation, no policy reviewed, just a closed door and a quiet hallway." A silence fell over the room, a silence that listened. "I left that building ashamed," she continued, "but I didn't stay that way. I couldn't. I had a boy to raise, and I knew he was watching, not just to see if I would survive, but to see what I believed about myself after being told I wasn't worth the space I occupied." She paused, eyes moving across the audience. "Some people build systems to exclude, others build them to include, and a few, when they've lived through exclusion, build systems that redefine the rules altogether. That's what I did. That's what we did. That's what second shift is." She told them about the first day she brought Mateo into a building where no one asked her to explain herself, about the new hires she'd mentored who now led departments of their own, about the cities that had redesigned zoning policies to allow for parent-led cooperatives and on-site childcare in business parks, about Mateo's Urban Equity Lab, where he and a team of young designers helped governments rethink public space as inclusive space. When she finished, the standing ovation was long, but even longer was the line of people who waited afterward, not to ask for autographs, but to tell their stories, to say I was that mother. My sister went through the same. I never realized I was part of the silence. That night, in her hotel room overlooking a city she didn't know, Elena sat on the edge of her bed and opened an email from Mateo. He had watched the live stream. His message was short. "You always say you didn't plan for this life, but I think this life was waiting for you." She closed the laptop and let the words settle around her like warm light. The next morning, back in her city, back at the Alvarez Ruiz Center, she was met with flowers taped to the front door, hand-drawn cards from the children in the playroom, a paper chain that wrapped around the banister of the stairwell, with every link bearing a name, staff members, clients, children, partners. When she asked what it was for, her team smiled and said, "It's our way of showing who you've helped stand." There were hundreds of names. She ran her fingers along the paper, noted the names of women who had once walked into her office with nothing but an eviction notice and a child on their hip, noted the names of fathers who'd been told a custody schedule would keep them from getting hired, noted the name of the first woman she ever interviewed, the one who had looked like Elena herself in another lifetime. One link read simply, "You saved my mother's life. I'm graduating this year." Another, "I've never had a badge with my name on it until here." She left the chain up for months. Then, at Mateo's urging, they preserved it behind glass, mounted on the wall of the new annex wing. They called it the Wall of Staying Power. No one had to explain the name. By then, everyone understood. Years passed again. Elena became not just a leader, but an institution. Her name was associated with infrastructure grants, labor reform, community equity planning. But in her own mind, she remained the woman who had once packed peanut butter sandwiches in a brown paper bag and told her son, "Just sit quietly, and I'll be back soon." She never stopped remembering that version of herself. She never stopped building for her. One day, walking the halls of the center after hours, she found a mother asleep on a bench, her toddler curled beside her, a blanket gently laid over them, probably by one of the interns. Elena didn't wake them, just dimmed the light, wrote a quick note, and left it on the mother's bag. "Rest is allowed here. You're safe." It was signed only with her initials. Later, when that mother joined second shift and rose through the culinary training program to run the center's kitchen, she told that story every year at graduation. "She didn't give me a lecture, she gave me permission." That had become Elena's legacy. Not just the programs, Not just the policy wins, but the permission she gave others to stop apologizing for being human in a world that sometimes forgot how to see them. She had been fired for bringing her son to work, but in that moment of dismissal, she had unknowingly been hired into something far greater, a lifetime of standing, of showing up, of building the kind of world where no one had to choose between feeding their children and being seen. She never forgot what it felt like to be asked to leave, and because of that, she became the one holding the door open for everyone else who had once been told they couldn't stay. Elena's final years at the helm of Second Shift were not marked by grand farewells or national headlines, but by the quiet rhythm of showing up day after day, year after year. She refused to retire with fanfare. Instead, she transitioned her leadership slowly, carefully, preparing a team that understood not just the structure of what they'd built, but the soul. She named her successor a young woman named Amara, someone who had once arrived in the program with a child in tow and a restraining order in her purse, terrified to speak above a whisper. Amara had blossomed into a fierce advocate, a gentle leader, and a strategist who reminded Elena of herself at every stage. "You'll be better than me," Elena said when she handed over the keys to the building. Amara shook her head. "I'll be different, and I'll stand because you did." Elena didn't need more than that. She continued to serve in an advisory role, mentoring new site leaders, visiting satellite programs, sitting quietly in the back of orientation sessions to watch the next generation hear those sacred words for the first time. "You are not a burden. You are not a risk. You are the reason we exist." Sometimes, when no one noticed, she would walk through the halls and press her hand gently to the walls, just to remember that this was real. That a space like this existed now in dozens of cities because once, years ago, she had stood outside a locked office door, holding her child's hand, and refused to disappear. Matteo became a national figure in his own right. He spearheaded legislation for family-centered urban planning, advocating for everything from stroller-accessible transportation systems to rent-controlled housing near schools. In his speeches, he often mentioned Elena, not as a footnote, but as a foundation. "My mother didn't just raise me," he said in one widely circulated address. "She redefined the rules so that other mothers wouldn't have to lose their dignity just to earn a living." In one of the first buildings they co-designed together, a community tech and care hub in Oakland, he had a quote etched above the main entrance: "Bring your whole life. We've made room." It became the mantra of the new movement. Even after she stepped away from leadership, Elena was still stopped in grocery stores, airport terminals, sidewalks. "You're the reason I got a second chance. You helped my sister get back on her feet. I stayed in the workforce because of you." She always responded with the same soft words: "I just kept the door open." When the city finally asked if they could name a plaza after her, one built at the heart of the community where Second Shift first took root, she agreed, but only on one condition: no statue and no marble, just a series of benches arranged in a wide circle, each one bearing a name of someone who had once walked through her doors and changed their life. At the center, a plaque, dedicated to those who stayed and those who stood beside them. On sunny afternoons, Elena would sometimes walk past and find strangers sitting there, some reading, others nursing babies, some just catching their breath. The circle always had someone in it. That was the point. On what would have been the 20th anniversary of her termination from Briar Hill, she stood outside that very same office complex. The building had been sold, renovated, and now housed a nonprofit co-working space. She had been invited to speak, but instead, she asked to just sit quietly in the courtyard. She watched as parents came and went, their children tagging along with backpacks and juice boxes. No one looked twice. No one whispered. No one questioned their place. She smiled. A woman approached, maybe 30, maybe younger, with a laptop bag over one shoulder and a baby in a sling on her chest. "Excuse me," the woman said. Are you Elena Alvarez?" "Yes," Elena replied. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "My mother used to talk about you. She said you were the reason she survived, the reason I ever had a home." Elena stood slowly, placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. "Then you're the reason I kept going," she said. The woman hugged her, gently but fully. That night, Elena walked through the plaza bearing her name. The benches were full again. She found her favorite one near the east side and sat down. The city lights glowed softly in the distance. Mateo called to check in. She told him she was fine, happy, at peace. When she hung up, she looked up at the stars. She thought of the girl she used to be, the one cleaning bathrooms, clutching a paper termination slip, trying to keep her son from feeling like a mistake. That girl would never have believed that this was where she'd land. She didn't rewrite the world with protest or politics. She rewrote it with presence, with choosing to show up when she was told to stay away, with bringing her son to work not as a flaw, but as a truth. And that truth grew into buildings, into programs, into people who never had to hide who they were just to be seen. She was fired for bringing her son to work. And because of that, millions of people found a place where they finally belonged. Elena Alvarez never wrote a memoir, though publishers asked, and some insisted the world needed to hear her version of the story. She always declined. "The story's already been written," she'd say. "It's just not in books. It's in lives." She meant it. Her legacy wasn't meant to be told in chapters, but traced in names, in changed policy, in benches worn smooth by use, in hallways once silent, now filled with the laughter of children whose parents were allowed to work without apology. And in the end, it was Mateo who told the story for her. He wrote it not as a biography, but as an open letter to the next generation of civic leaders, planners, social workers, and change makers. The title was simple. She Stayed. It opened with a single sentence. "My mother was fired for bringing me to work, and the world hasn't been the same since." The letter went viral, not because it was flashy or dramatic, but because it carried truth like water, gentle, unstoppable. It was read aloud at high school graduations, quoted in mayoral speeches, printed on posters for community design summits. It was even etched onto a mural in Chicago, his words rising like scaffolding across a wall once bare. She stayed, and because she stayed, we stood, and because we stood, the ground shifted. In her final years, Elena was honored in a dozen quiet ways. A college created a scholarship in her name for single parents. A national award for workplace dignity was renamed the Alvarez Citation. A children's book was written based loosely on her life. A little boy and his mother cleaning offices, dreaming of building a city together. She smiled when Mateo showed her the illustrations. "He has your eyes," she said of the cartoon boy. "He has your courage," Mateo replied. They sat on her porch, the afternoon light folding gently over them. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, dotted with rooftops she had helped raise. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't walked back into that building with me?" Mateo asked. She took a breath, slow and measured. "Sometimes. But then I remember it wasn't about one building. It was about never letting anyone else lock a door behind me again." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I didn't know where I was going back then," she added. "But I knew I couldn't go back to hiding." Mateo nodded. "You didn't just find a way forward. You built one." He kissed the top of her head. They didn't say much after that. They didn't have to. In the end, Elena passed quietly in her sleep, in the same modest home where she had once sketched out her first training plan on a napkin, the fridge still covered in children's drawings and second-shift magnets. At her memorial, held not in a church, but in the courtyard of the Alvarez Ruiz Center, hundreds gathered. There was no casket, just a circle of chairs and a microphone passed hand to hand. They told stories, not of a saint, not of a legend, but of a woman who made room, who stood back up, who refused to believe motherhood, poverty, or pain made someone less worthy of opportunity. Mateo spoke last. "My mother wasn't trying to be a hero," he said. "She was trying to survive. And because the world made that hard, she decided to change the world." He paused. "She was fired for bringing me to work, but she gave me work to believe in. And for the rest of my life, I will keep building what she began. Not just in buildings, but in every space I walk into and say, 'Come in. You're welcome here. There's room.'" The crowd stood in silence, not for a moment of respect, but in honor of everything she had taught them, about presence, about compassion, about showing up not as a brand or a product, but as a full human truth. They stood, because she had stayed, because she had carried them all when no one else would, and because even after she was gone, her echo remained in every policy rewritten, every hallway opened, every child no longer told to sit quietly in the corner of someone else's life. She was fired for bringing her son to work, and in doing so, she taught the world how to bring its whole self to everything it does. That is how history bends. That is how futures begin. The plaza at the center of the city still bore her name, but Elena Alvarez's impact had long outgrown any sign or structure. People stopped calling it the Alvarez Ruiz Center years ago. They just called it the Circle. Not because of the benches or the layout, but because of what it represented. A full return, a closing of a wound, a place where people who once felt pushed out could finally feel invited in. On what would have been her 83rd birthday, dozens of former second shift members returned. They brought their children, some now grown themselves. They brought new recruits, program directors, and partners. But more than that, they brought presence. They brought the ripple of her original refusal to be erased, each of them a link in the chain of resistance she had quietly forged, one kind word, one held door, one rewritten schedule at a time. Mateo was there, of course. Silver threaded his hair now, and he had a daughter of his own. Her name was Elenita, and she wore red glasses, just like her abuela once had. She ran around the plaza barefoot, trailing giggles and chalk dust, as she helped draw hearts on the sidewalk stones. Mateo stood near the fountain and looked out at the crowd. People seated, people standing, people leaning in as if to be part of something not finished yet. He took the mic not as a politician or professor, but as a son. "My mother didn't set out to lead a movement," he said. "She just wanted to keep me safe. She didn't ask for headlines. She asked for dignity. And because she couldn't find it in the systems around her, she created it." He looked down for a moment as if steadying himself. Then, "This plaza, this program, this coalition, it's all her voice, echoing, every time a parent walks into a job interview without hiding their truth, every time a child falls asleep in a safe space while their mother earns a paycheck, every time someone says, 'I see you, I hear you, I'll wait with you.' That's her." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded note, faded now, creased 100 times over. "She left this in my lunchbox the first day I went to high school. I was terrified. She knew it. So she wrote this." He unfolded the paper and read aloud. "You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to try again. And if the world doesn't make room, make your own table. I'll be sitting beside you." The crowd went still. Some pressed tissues to their eyes. Others closed them, letting the words settle. When he finished, Mateo walked to the bench his mother used to favor. He sat down and invited his daughter to sit beside him. "Do you remember what I told you this morning?" he asked her softly. Elenita nodded. "That today we honor the lady who let people stay." "That's right," he said, pulling her into his side. "She stayed so the rest of us could stand." One by one, The crowd began placing candles along the circular fountain. Not with fanfare, not with performance, just quiet offerings of light. And as the sun dipped low behind the buildings she had once only cleaned from the outside, a breeze stirred through the trees, lifting a single paper drawing from one of the benches. It was a child's sketch, crayons on white. A tall woman holding hands with a boy. Above the mem, in red crayon, were the words, "I was that kid. But now I'm home." No one claimed the drawing. No one had to. It belonged to all of them. The plaza lights flickered on one by one, and somewhere in the spaces between silence and legacy, the story of Elena Alvarez kept breathing. Not in chapters, but in footsteps, in hands held, in doors left open. That same evening, after the plaza had quieted and most of the visitors had drifted home, candles still flickering in soft circles around the benches, Mateo stayed behind. He sat alone beneath the tree planted in his mother's honor, its roots stretching wide beneath the bricks of the courtyard, its branches casting gentle shadows over the worn paths. In his lap was the very first second shift handbook. The pages had yellowed slightly, the corners dog-eared, notes scrawled in his mother's handwriting filling the margins. It wasn't just a guide. It was her philosophy etched in ink. Phrases like, "Don't ask them to earn compassion," and "Build flexibility like its structure." On the final page, a quote from her favorite poem, "There is room for you here." Mateo closed the book and ran his hand over its cover like a prayer. Then he stood, walked to the center of the circle, and placed it gently beneath the plaque that bore her name. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The city had already declared the following week Alvarez Week, with schools building lesson plans around her legacy and libraries hosting workshops for parents and children together. A new transit line was in development, designed specifically around family-friendly schedules, and dubbed the Elena Line. At the ribbon cutting, someone joked, "Only seems right. She never let a route end before it got everyone home." But Mateo knew none of those honors would have meant as much to her as what happened every morning in buildings like this one. Parents arriving with their children and not needing to explain. Supervisors asking first, "What do you need to succeed?" Young people hearing, "You belong," before they ever doubted it. In one of the newly built centers in Detroit, a mural was painted along the hallway leading from the main entrance to the family common area. It depicted a simple scene, a woman crouched beside a boy, both of them surrounded by doors. Some doors were closed, others wide open. But the focus wasn't on the doors. It was on the woman's hand, extended outward, not to push anyone away, but to steady them as they stepped forward. Above the mural, in large block letters, was the phrase now etched into second shift history. She was fired for bringing her son to work, so she built a world where no one had to choose. The mural became a pilgrimage point for program leaders across the country. They took photos in front of it, held team retreats beneath its colors, told new hires, "This is who we are." And in a classroom just 2 blocks away, a young girl named Mari, a second grader with bright braids and a quiet voice, read her class project aloud during Family Legacy Week. "My mama says Miss Elena was like a lighthouse," she read. "She stood where it was darkest and never moved, so everyone else could find their way." When her teacher asked what Mari wanted to be when she grew up, the girl answered, "A builder, like her. But I want to build places where grown-ups can cry if they need to. My mama said that matters too." No one in the classroom laughed. They all nodded, because they'd seen it, because someone had once stood for them, because her story, Elena's story, had become theirs. And so, long after she was gone, Elena Alvarez remained. In lights left on after hours, in break rooms where no one was turned away, in HR manuals rewritten with humanity at the center, in the quiet kindness of bosses who now led with memory in their bones. She had been pushed out for having nowhere to leave her child. So she carved a space in the world where parents no longer had to ask permission to be whole. That was her revolution. That was her love story, and it would never end. In the years that followed, Elena's legacy evolved, not into something stagnant or sealed behind glass, but into a living organism, a breathing philosophy that wove its way into how cities worked, how companies were built, and how communities defined success. There was no single headquarters now. The second shift model had outgrown the need for one. Instead, there were dozens, hundreds, of small hubs scattered across neighborhoods, schools, places of worship, even grocery stores. Wherever there was a door, there was the possibility of dignity. In one such hub in Minneapolis, a young program coordinator named Syra kept a sticky note above her desk. It read, "Ask what they carry before you ask what they can do." She'd copied it from a line Elena had once scribbled in the margin of a newsletter draft. She didn't know that note would become the unofficial motto for an entire division of second shift. But it had. At an education policy conference, a school principal gave a speech titled, "From Compliance to Care." She opened with a story about the first time she read about Elena Alvarez, how she had cried at her desk, recognizing herself in the description of a mother crouched beside a cot in a supply closet whispering, "Just be quiet, baby, and no one will notice." That moment, she said, changed the way she led. Now, every staff handbook in her district began with one question. What kind of world are we creating if parents have to hide their children to keep their jobs? In a small town in Arizona, a father of two stood in front of a city council and recited the story of Elena's firing, not with rage, but with quiet purpose. "She didn't burn the place down," he said. "She built something better beside it." They voted to rezone an old department store into a community child care cooperative and job training center. And in Mateo's own classroom, where he now taught civic architecture and the ethics of space, his students didn't learn about Elena from textbooks. They learned by walking through neighborhoods she helped design, where play areas were visible from job centers, where transportation routes wrapped around caregiving hubs, where benches weren't just decoration, but places to rest, breastfeed, cry, laugh, and begin again. Sometimes students would ask him, "What would your mother think about all of this?" He always answered the same. She'd ask if the bathrooms were clean, if the mothers felt safe, if the children had snacks. Then she'd smile and tell us to keep going. Because that's how she lived. She never centered herself. She never asked for credit. She just kept showing up, long after she was told she couldn't. Even after her death, when her name became an award, a curriculum, a city ordinance, people remembered her best through presence. A worn backpack hanging beside a polished desk. A drawing of a rocket ship taped to a mentor's clipboard. A lunch packed lovingly between shifts. A job orientation that began not with paperwork, but with, "Tell us what you need to succeed." They remembered her through Mateo, too, the way he spoke, the way he listened, the way he once told an entire room, "My mother taught me that systems only work if they make room for the people most likely to be pushed out." And the way, after a long day of meetings, he would still stop at the second shift library to read to the kids, always with his sleeves rolled up, always choosing books where the heroes looked like the readers. One of those children, a boy named Khalid, asked him once, "Is it true your mom used to mop floors?" "Yes," Mateo replied. "And now she has a statue?" "No," he said. "She asked them not to build one." "Why not?" Mateo thought for a moment. "She said a statue can't hold a child." The boy nodded solemnly and then returned to his coloring. That answer traveled quietly, powerfully, across campuses, boardrooms, and ministries. When people brought up honoring Elena with monuments, it always ended with someone saying, "She said a statue can't hold a child," and the conversation would shift, not to marble or bronze, but to policy, to partnership, to permanence, because that was the real tribute, not remembering her, but continuing her. One spring afternoon, Mateo took Elenita, now 11, to the original Lakeshore building. It had long since changed owners and purpose, but the hallway where Elena had once been called to be fired still stood. He walked her to it, showed her the corner where she'd held his hand while a door closed on her future. "This is where it happened?" Elenita asked. He nodded. "What do we do here?" He smiled. "We remember." She didn't ask anything else. She simply pulled out a small piece of paper and wrote one sentence in pink ink. "There is always room for someone else." She taped it to the wall. No plaque, no audience. Just another step in the story. Because Elena Alvarez hadn't built an empire, she built a doorway. And no one ever had to knock again. That doorway, the one Elena built through perseverance and refusal to be erased, became the architectural model for countless lives, ones she never met and yet touched anyway. Years beyond her passing, a young man named Jordan, barely 23 and freshly hired as a second-shift coordinator in Atlanta, stood before a room of new hires. His nerves showed. He clutched the presentation remote a bit too tightly, cleared his throat twice before starting, but when he began to speak, his voice leveled. "I got this job because someone decided they were tired of watching good people be discarded," he said. "And I want to tell you the story of the woman who made that possible, not with capital, but with a child on her hip and a pink slip in her hand." He told them everything. About the firing, about the son who watched, about the boss who once said, "I was that kid." About second shift rising like a quiet anthem from the silence of shame. By the end, two of the new hires, both single mothers, both unsure if they truly belonged, were wiping their eyes. Jordan smiled gently. She didn't want worship. She wanted warmth. And if you leave this program having offered that to someone else, even once, you've honored her more than any monument could. That same week, in the Denver branch of the program, an art project took shape, one started by the children in the afternoon care room. They had been asked to draw the person who made them feel safe. Most drew their mothers. Some, older siblings, one boy, 6 years old, drew Elena. He'd never met her, never seen her photo, but he'd heard her name so many times through lessons, stories, the mural in the hallway, that to him, she was part of the present. "She made it so my mom didn't have to hide me anymore," he told the coordinator. The drawing was hung up on the office bulletin board, beside a note written by the coordinator herself. "Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what continues to breathe without you." In Oakland, a new initiative began under the direction of a former second-shift mentee. It was called the Standing Room, and it was a community center designed around the principle that no one should have to sit alone in struggle. Its waiting area had no partitions, no locked doors, no numbered systems, just couches, children's books, a long communal table with coffee and bread. Above the main entrance hung the phrase, "She stayed, so we stand." That phrase made its way to a courtroom 1 year later, where a judge in Boston quoted it while granting deferred sentencing and support access for a parent who'd brought their infant to a job interview out of desperation. In a country where Elena Alvarez once lost her job for doing the same, the judge said, "We cannot continue pretending that survival is misconduct." The transcript went viral. A coalition of lawyers and advocates launched a new project the following month, the Alvarez Accord, a legal framework for family-inclusive employment protections. It passed in 3 states that year. In Mateo City, construction began on a new building, a joint partnership between the Alvarez Ruiz Center and the Department of Transportation. It would house job training, child care, social workers, and a community kitchen under one solar-powered roof, the first of its kind. They named it The Bridge. During the groundbreaking ceremony, Mateo was asked how his mother would feel about all of it. She'd be proud, he said, but then she'd ask why it took so long. The crowd laughed, nodding. many of them having once sat across from Elena in meetings, interviews, small conversations that somehow changed their course. I think she'd tell us to keep going, to quit applauding and get back to work, because someone's going to walk in tomorrow with the same fear she once carried. And the only way we honor her is to make sure we don't ask them to justify needing help. His voice cracked slightly. She was fired for bringing me to work. He paused, letting the silence settle like gravity. But because of that, millions of children now grow up knowing their parents are allowed to show up whole. In the crowd, a young woman holding a baby to her chest whispered to her partner, "That's what I want for us." Elena's name wasn't a brand anymore. It was a verb, a way of doing things, of leading, of protecting, of remembering what mattered. And as the seasons shifted, as more cities joined the movement, as more buildings opened and families found safe footing where before there had been nothing but closed doors, her story slipped from being one told in past tense into something closer to myth, but truer than any legend. In whispers, people said, "She was the one who stayed. She was the one who saw us. She was the first door that didn't lock behind us." And wherever a parent tucked a child into a soft corner of an office instead of a cold car seat. Wherever a hiring manager said, "Let's talk about what support looks like for you." Wherever a child's drawing hung above a paycheck stub like a blessing. That's where she was, still, always.